Hello and welcome. Let's talk about Season 1, Episode 1 of Star Wars The Mandalorian. It was a show. I haven't really decided if it was good or bad yet, but you know what? Let me go over a quick synopsis of the show. So I'm going to spoil just everything about it. If you don't want it spoiled, up here will be a timestamp of when you can skip to avoid all these spoilers. For everyone else who has no interest in seeing it or doesn't have Disney Plus and doesn't plan on getting it anytime soon, here's a quick synopsis. Meet the Mandalorian. He's a man of few words who enjoys long walks on the beach. Long, slow walks. A lot of this show is him walking slowly, actually. He enters a seedy bar where we find some random blue alien who's about to have his kidneys stolen by 3 space thugs. The Mandalorian is blamed for the spilled drink of one of the thugs and eventually beats up the 3 thugs. In fact, he ends up killing at least one of them, by cutting him in half with the door that leads in and out of the bar. With the aliens out of the way, or the alien thugs out of the way, I should say, we find out that the alien who was getting the shakedown has a bounty on his head, and the Mandalorian is here to claim the bounty. And we get a cool line at this point about how he can either come in cold or he can come in warm. And we see that the bounty decides that he wants to be brought in alive, and so he follows him handcuffed up. So they take this long walk out to a frozen lake, and we find out that for some reason, the Mandalorian doesn't like droids. So the nice fancy speeder that had a droid driving it is sent away, and instead we get a rundown junker with the humanoid driving it. And we're given some not so subtle foreshadowing that they're about to be attacked by some creature called a Ravenak. And sure enough, a minute later, we see that as the cabbie's driving away, the cabbie gets swallowed up by the Ravenak, which is this huge walrus or hippo-ish type creature. And after eating the cabbie, it comes for the Mandalorian. And you know what? I'm not going to keep calling him the Mandalorian. I'm going to call him Avery. So Avery and his mark are being attacked by this hippo creature, and they're in their spaceship trying to get away, but the hippo creature is bitten onto one of the landing legs of the spaceship, and Avery grabs a cattle prod and shocks him off. So they make it away. And once in space, his mark just will not shut up. Just yak, 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 yak. We find out that it's sometime after the fall of the Empire, which, you know, if you've been reading about it, you already knew that, but it's nice to have them actually tell you that explicitly in the show and not expect you to have just this background knowledge already preloaded into your mind because you've been reading press releases. So I enjoyed that. And so he bumbles about and kills a few minutes of screen time before he gets placed into carbonite. He gets frozen in carbonite. And at this point, Avery meets up with the head of the Bounty Guild on a planet and turns over 4 or 5 bounties. And initially, the head of the guild tries to pay Avery in Imperial credits, but Avery rejects them. And so instead, he gets some calamari, I think they call it flan, calamari flan is the credits they use. But he can only get half a credit, or half the credits he would have gotten otherwise. But he accepts it. So we find out that work has been slow since presumably the fall of the Empire. It's not that there's not bounties out there to get, it's that no one's willing to pay guild rates. And the amount of money that they're being offered isn't even enough to cover the cost of fuel to get the bounty and come back. So there's that, but we do find out that there's one bounty out there. It's an off the books, off the records, hush-hush bounty, and Avery decides to take this bounty. So he heads off to wherever they are, and as soon as he gets there, the door opens up, and surprise, surprise, we find out that it's a leftover group of the Empire. And there's this brief, tense moment where someone enters unexpectedly, and the Mandalorian pulls out his blaster and his cattle prod, and we get this fun line about when the stormtrooper goes, you know, stand down, there's 4 of us and only 1 of you. And the Mandalorian responds with, I like those odds. And so, it's cheesy, but it was a fun line. I enjoyed it. But the Mexican standoff ends, and we're told about the bounty. We're told that he's a 50-year-old mark, and they want him to bring him in alive. At this point, the leader of the Empire forces there, this little cell, says, look, I understand that bounty hunting is a difficult thing, and so if he comes in dead, such is life, but we're only going to pay you half credits. And then, there's Dr. Concave Chest over here, and he's really upset about this statement. He's like, we didn't agree to that. That wasn't the deal. But the head of the Empire people, he's like, well, I'm just trying to be pragmatic about these things. So Avery is given a tracking fob to find the mark and a down payment of Beskar steel. And Avery takes the steel and the calamari flan that he got back to where some Mandalorians are. And we get this, quick little flashback about Avery's past. We find out that Avery is an orphan, something that they call foundlings in this series, and that he was brought in by this group of Mandalorians. And they take the Beskar steel and they turn it into a shoulder pad for Avery there. So we also get we see his parents die, and it's pretty much the backstory to Superman. Mama puts him into a shuttle and he gets off the planet while everyone else dies. So after he gets his shoulder pad, Avery heads off to this unnamed mark and arrives at a desert-like planet. And he's looking through his rifle scope, kind of checking out the area, when he gets attacked by this froggish-looking creature. And we find out later it's called a blurg. So Avery is eventually rescued by... You know what? In my notes, I have him as Brackets, because I intended to go back and fill in his name later, but we never actually are told his name in the show. So I'm just going to call him Brackets. So Avery is eventually rescued by Brackets and taught how to ride the blurg when it's revealed that you can't get to this encampment where the mark is at without riding one of the blurg. So Avery, he's about to attack these people in the encampment where the mark is, when all of a sudden a bounty hunter robot shows up, or they call him a bounty droid. And Avery's like, oh gosh, not a droid. This is the worst thing ever. And the droid just has no subtlety. Like Avery was going to stealth into the place, take people out all sneakily. And the droid's just walking the front door. He's like, according to intergalactic law, you must hand over the mark. And of course they don't do this. And a firefight happens. And we get into this cool scene where the droid's he's just hitting everyone, spinning around completely. Because his upper torso is just like able to pivot 360 degrees with no problem. And so the area gets initially cleared, and Avery runs down there, and he's like, what are you doing? And they have a brief argument about who the mark belongs to, and they decide to split it. And Avery's trying to get out, come on, we need to regroup. And the droid just keeps well, we need to decide who's going to get the credit for bringing this mark in. The reputation credit. And he's like, yeah, let's talk about this later, come on. And while they're having this humorous scene back and forth, they get completely surrounded. And once they're surrounded, the droid is like, I must now self-destruct. According to company protocol, I am not allowed to be captured. And Avery's like, what? No, not now. Hold off. And so they keep this joke going a couple times. It's a real funny scene where the droid keeps trying to blow himself up and Avery keeps getting the stall. But eventually, they're not able to hide behind these pillars anymore when this Gatling turret shows up. But Avery convinces the droid to be a decoy. He kills the guy on the turret and then uses the turret to take down everyone else. And they're like, well, how are we supposed to get in this door behind us where the mark is? And they decide to use the Gatling turret to blow out the door. They use laser fire to cut out the shape of the door. And so they get in there, they kill the last member of this enclave who was still around, hiding inside. And they find the mark. And the mark ends up being a baby of Yoda's species. And lest you think that I was being too lazy to look this up, officially, Yoda has no name for his species. At one point, there was some thought about him being, and this is all legacy stuff, so how much is that accurate now? But at one point, they said maybe he's a part of the Linux species. But it was revealed that no, those people aren't even related to Yoda's species. Yoda's just this really old, mysterious species, and he has there's no name for it. So it's a baby from Yoda's species. And there's initial confusion because they were told that the mark was 50 years old, and this is clearly a baby. And the droid makes a comment about, well, perhaps it's just that different species age at different rates. So this species could live to be centuries old. And maybe this is just still part of his infancy life cycle. Which is kind of odd to me, but, let's talk about that in a minute. So anyway, Avery's like, okay, well, let's bring him in alive. And the droid responds with, no, my client was really specific. The mark has to be brought in dead. And so we get this moment of focusing on Avery as they're thinking, and then presumably the droid shoots and kills the baby, but the camera zooms out and we find that Avery's the one who shot the droid. So the droid falls over, completely destroyed, and Avery reaches his hand out to the baby, like one finger, and you see the little baby reaching up to grab his finger. Okay, so that is the end of the quick synopsis for Star Wars The Mandalorian Season 1, Episode 1. So let's talk about things I liked and things I didn't like and things that I was just kind of neutral about. So I'm going to start with the negative stuff because I want to end on a positive note. So we're going to go bad stuff, neutral stuff, good stuff. So in terms of things I didn't like, did you know that the Germans in World War II were bad guys? I know that might come as a shock to some people, but they were. And just in case you missed it, the connection between the Empire and the First Order and the World War II German people, they really hammer that point home in this series because they make the general of the Empire have, I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be a German accent. I think it is an American trying to do a German accent, or maybe a British guy trying to do a German accent. But this was clearly supposed to be a German accent. And while I am personally 100% against the World War II Germans, the fact that they're trying to make this even more obvious that the Empire was supposed to be the Germans from World War II, that was kind of a world-breaking moment for me. Like, it was a really weird thing to include this German accent in the middle of Star Wars. And also, I kind of feel bad for modern-day Germans that everyone's trying to continually equate everything that they are now with the party that was in charge then. And I feel bad for modern Germans. I was sad that they're still sticking to this fuel thing, that it's gonna be a part of Star Wars. And, you know, to be fair, that kind of plot point works better in a TV series than it does in a movie, so I'll grant them that. It's just, you know, it was such a cheap plot gimmick in the movie where you couldn't figure out how to write your way into the story you wanted, so you just threw in and created this plot gimmick that it's kind of tainted me against it happening in the TV show, but there is that. Things I'm going to be nitpicky about, and these are nitpicks, so these aren't bad things, these are just 100% me being nitpicky about things. The first time we meet Avery, and if you skip the synopsis section, Avery is what I'm calling the Mandalorian. We don't know their name yet, so I'm just going to call them Avery. So when we first meet Avery, we get this music playing, because, you know, every time we have a main character in Star Wars, we give them a theme song. And it's supposed to be like this mysterious music, but it ended up making me laugh hard, because there's this running joke in, a long time ago, there was a comedian called Stan Freberg, and he did a presentation of American history, which was just 100% comedy. And it went from the founding of America, from the Europeans, to the American Revolution. And at several points throughout this audio commentary, or audio comedy rather, you'd have this really dramatic thing happen, and you'd get this dun-dun, dun-dun, like, you know, dun-dun-dun kind of music from a French horn. And someone would go, "What was that?" And you'd have a straight man reply in this deadpan voice, "It was French horns." Instead of, you know, stating the obvious, like it was this dramatic thing that happened. So when Avery came into the door and this music played, it was supposed to be this really dramatic music kind of sound, but it just sounded like the French horn joke from Stan Freberg Presents United States of America, that it just had me really laughing. Like, even if I didn't know that, the music they had for The Mandalorian was just such a weird choice that it would have brought me out of the scene. But because I did know about Stan Freberg, it just completely, it broke it for me. So that's a nitpicky thing. The other nitpicky thing was the Ravenac. Like, it made for a decent enough starting your series set piece. But it's like, if this is such a concern, why are people parking in the middle of this lake? It's an ice planet. There's plenty of parking because it's mostly deserted. So why the middle of the lake if these Ravenac attacks were so prevalent? And finally, the last nitpicky thing, or I guess it's not the last nitpicky thing, the second to last, was I was wondering how those fobs work. So we're given this fob to track the Mandalorian's mark, Avery's mark. And it made sense for me that they talked about bail jumpers and a smuggler. And like, okay, maybe these bail jumpers, they were clearly captured and processed by a police department. So maybe they got chipped or something. And when they skip bail, they can use this little, what they're calling a fob, it's a tracking device, to track the person down. But then we find out about Avery's mark. And there's no way Avery's mark was processed by anyone, because if they were, they never would have let them go in the first place. And once you watch it, you'll see why it makes no sense for Avery's mark to have been chipped at any point in time. But then if it's like, well, we're just tracking your genetic code, it raises all sorts of questions. If you can literally track someone's genetic code once you're anywhere on the planet that they're on. But honestly, I think that this little fob tracker is just going to be like the doctor's screwdriver. It will do whatever the plot needs it to do, and it will never work when we need the plot to kind of be stretched out. And I think that's kind of what the format of these episodes is going to take, where the Mandalorian is at the guild, gets told about his mark, and then goes to get that mark. And now we're going to have kind of this added dynamic of the Mandalorian looking after his final mark that you meet at the end of the episode. We'll see what happens there. My last nitpick is when he first is attacked by this blurg, Avery doesn't even get close to hitting the creature with a flamethrower. Like, he has a flamethrower hidden on his armband thing. And it was obvious that the way it was supposed to go down is Avery, shoots his flames toward this creature that's coming right at him, and it singes him, but the creature manages to get Avery's arm, and they're wrestling and they're fighting. But that's not what happened. Instead, what happened is Avery pointed his arm straight out to the side, and then whatever grabbed him in real life grabbed him and wrestled him. And so it was clear that it was bad stage directing, but it really brought me out of the show. And I admit, this is such a super nitpicky thing for me. Like, this is me being ridiculously nitpicky at that point. Except for one final nitpick, a bonus nitpick. There is one continuity error that I caught that was like really glaring to me. Like, at one point, Avery gets this new shoulder pad, and it's nice and silver. And then there's a scene where they focus right in on Avery, and he's wearing 2 red shoulder pads again. And it was a random continuity thing, me being overly nitpicky. So that's the negative stuff. You can see that was really low level negative stuff. Not that big a deal. In terms of things that I was 100% neutral about, it didn't feel like Star Wars. And you might be like, why isn't that a bad thing? Well, it's a neutral thing for me because it fits in with the Rogue One and Solo movies. Neither one of those really had a Star Wars feel, but they weren't supposed to feel Star Wars. And I think that you'll get a better enjoyment out of those movies if you do understand that they're not supposed to be Star Wars. Like, they take place in the Star Wars universe, but they're not Star Wars, if that makes sense. And I think that while this movie doesn't necessarily feel super Star Warsy, this TV show doesn't feel super Star Warsy, it's going to work as a TV show level. Not necessarily a great way to do it for the movies, I thought, but I think it is going to work on a TV show level. And I almost feel like the fact that it is different helps us to create that mental gap that, okay, this is a separate kind of look at things than what we've been looking at in the movies. It kind of helps differentiate the TV shows from the movies. So, it ended up being a neutral thing. Another neutral thing is that this show is chock full of Star Wars references. There is a reference to Life Day, which is from the Christmas special. There were references to the little creature that was always with Jabba. Just constant, nonstop Star Wars references. And you would be like, well, wouldn't that be a plus, right? And, yeah, kinda. The reason it was a neutral for me is I'm not just saying that obviously we're in Star Wars, so there's gonna be Star Wars references. I mean, like, the camera stopped on an object that was completely incidental to everything else. And it's like, hey, do you remember this thing from Star Wars? I remember this thing from Star Wars. Yay! And on the plus side, I'm really glad that there's someone, it looks like there's someone in Disney and Lucasfilm now who actually cares about Star Wars and is making sure that things mesh up. It's just be cool about it, man. Don't go overboard. Just, we know you know. You're showing us you know. Don't go overboard with like stopping and kind of nudging us like, yeah, did you see that? Huh? Yeah, we saw it. Just be cool. Last thing I was neutral on was the music. The music's all right. It's hard to not have a score done by John Williams, especially when he just poured his soul into that last trailer we saw for The Rise of Skywalker. I mean, that was just such a phenomenal piece of Star Wars music by John Williams that it was hard to come off of that into the Mandalorian music. And it's not that the music was bad. The music was quite acceptable for a TV series. It was just, when you put the two next to each other, it was an odd transition. But again, I do hope that this is something where, like I said about it not feeling like Star Wars, I hope that the fact that the music is different kind of helps create this mental thought that this is separate from the Star Wars movies. Everything we've been focused on Star Wars up to now has really been more on, at least cinematically, has been more on the Jedi and the Sith and this intergalactic battle. And now we're pulling things back and kind of looking at it from an everyday person, which is a great transition into the things that I really liked about the Star Wars. What I really liked is it's a neat look on how the average person would have been affected by the fall of the Empire. I mean, why would you accept Imperial credits? The Empire is gone. The government that backed that currency is defunct. It's no more. They're becoming increasingly worthless, and so that's just real world economics. I appreciate that kind of like, hey, here's a practical look at what it would be like, and on that, how would it be like? Now there's this group of Empire people, and they're displaced and trying to get things back in order for the Empire. And now we also kind of have this enclave where the Mark was, and it's like, yeah, they showed up, and I think reading between the lines, they showed up specifically because the government has been destabilized by the fall of the Empire. So I really hope that they lean more into this. I really want a more thorough look of, in real life, even a despot government or a despotic government, an evil government, even an evil government, when it falls, there's going to be a rough transition period, and there's going to be a lot of destabilization to the area. And I hope that they kind of lean into that, because that would be a really cool look. And it was something that I think that they missed in the Force Awakens and The Last Jedi with Finn's character. They really could have looked at this duality he was facing between, I was indoctrinated to be a stormtrooper, and now I'm having to fight stormtroopers, people that I potentially grew up with and worked with and trained with, and I just killed all of them on a Starkiller base, or now I'm killing all of them on Snoke's ship because I worked on the Supremacy also. So I think they missed that in the movies, and I really hope they lean into it in the TV series, because the TV series has more time to flesh things out for this. And on that, while I did rib it for they take a long time walking places, like there's a lot of walking in this first episode, it was a good pace for the first episode of a TV show. You get to take more time kind of developing things more organically in a TV show than you can in a movie where you have 2 to 2.5 hours. And 2.5 hours is really stretching it for your standard cinematic movie. So I do think it was a good pace. It reminded me a lot about the pace and even the aesthetics of the remake of Battlestar Galactica. And I do foresee a lot of drama in The Mandalorian. I liked Bracket Guy. Once they make a statement, once he made a statement, he'd always say, "I have spoken." And I really liked it. It was like there was no need for him to make a big deal out of a promise. You make the statement, and then you do what you said. It was nice and simple. I really liked he said he'd make a statement. He's like, "Yep, that's it. I've spoken. We're going to do it." And so I kind of like that little aspect of this character. I really, really, really like that Avery fails several times in this first episode. It's refreshing in Star Wars to again see a character with flaws who isn't perfect, and to have this be the main character, one you're going to be focusing on. Avery, one of the other things we find out about Avery is that he hasn't received his signet yet. And I'm assuming that this signet is some sort of Mandalorian rite of passage. And so that makes me excited. We're going to be, like, Avery seems like he's a young graduate of the Mandalorian caste system, however they end up doing things. I don't know. So I think that we're going to see him upgrading his armor, because in this time he got one shoulder pad made out of this, I forgot the name of the steel, but out of this steel, very special type of steel. In Legacy information, it used to be the extended Star Wars universe, that you found out that this was a special steel that could only be mined on Mandalore, the home planet of the Mandalorians, and that they alone know the secret processes for refining this and tempering this to get the most out of the steel. So I enjoy seeing that we're probably going to see that this armor is upgraded over time. Eventually, Avery gets his signet and presumably becomes the big chief of all the Mandalorians. So it was really refreshing to see that they're not already at this stage. We're going to get to see this process go through. I really look forward to that. I really also like that the bounty hunter droid doesn't miss much. It's always weird in sci-fi where you have this android or robot or droid shooting, and they have all the aim accuracy of your standard stormtrooper. No, they're a robot. They should always, almost like every shot should be them producing a Wilhelm scream, basically. So I enjoyed that. And this episode had several points that made me laugh. It was a good mix of drama and humor that works really well for a TV series. And finally, I really like that there is a bit of a mystery setup at the end of the episode, and not necessarily about who the mark was, which I'm not going to spoil that. But you find out that there were possibly two different people going after this mark. One who said he has to be brought in absolutely dead, and one who said we prefer alive, but we understand if dead. And one of the things that I liked is that that two different people might have been one person. We get a little hint that it might have been the same person. So I enjoy that there's a bit of intrigue already being worked in the plot. So it's not just who's the mark, but who's after the mark. So those were the things that I really, really enjoyed about this episode. So why am I having a hard time giving this episode a solid score? The answer is because I need to see more of The Mandalorian. As a standalone episode, if I was insulated from everything else that has been going on in our culture and in Star Wars and just all the movies Disney is kind of over right now, I think I would have given this movie a 7 or 8. It definitely had me excited. It wasn't a perfect first episode, but it was a good, strong first episode. And I think that it definitely has room to grow. However, I suspect at the same time that this is going to head into more social and political talking points that, no matter where you stand on politics or social issues, these issues, when they make it a super huge deal in the show, where your plot revolves around this issue, they don't age well. And I really want this to be a good series. I don't want it to be divisive. I want them to keep our politics and social issues out of the galaxy far, far away, a long time ago, politics and social issues. I think they can still excellently integrate any message they want into the show without it being painful. Great example of this, the Orville. The Orville does a great job examining modern social issues, except it does it from such a neutral position where they present the information to you and then they treat you like you're intelligent and can actually make up your own mind, that even the issues that I disagree with Seth MacFarlane on, I love the episode. Like, it is such a well-made episode that even though I disagree with him, I still think it was a well-done episode. So that's why I don't know how they're going to go with it. I do have strong hopes. Like, even if it turned out where, we all saw in the trailer where the Mandalorian takes off the helmet, except, they don't take it off. But they're about to. And as soon as I saw that, I'm like, oh, you know what? This is going to be a Metroid thing where they take off the helmet and it turned out that it was a woman the whole time. And I was worried about that because Disney has not done a good job portraying women. They portray them as overpowered and without flaws. And so they're not a character that people can relate to. They're not a character that women can relate to. And so I've been disappointed with their portrayal of women because it's almost insulting to women, you know? Like, well, this is what every woman should be like, and it's this unrealistic standard. So that's why I was initially concerned by that trailer. But the way they treated Avery in this episode is so like, this is a flawed person. This is a person that's learning. And so I think that based on this one episode, if they were to continue down this path, and yeah, it turns out that it's a woman, I'd be like, I don't care. They have made a great character, and I don't care if it's a boy or a girl under the helmet. Now, obviously, that's just from this first episode. We have no idea where they're going to go with the episodes to come. No idea if they're going to lean into Avery being perfect. And that's why I had picked the name Avery. Avery could be a boy. Avery could be a girl. We don't know. We're just going to kind of keep it up in the air until later. I do hope, I even have high hopes that this is going to be, even if it's not the greatest Star Wars series, I think it's going to be a good standalone series based on this first episode. So I am willing to kind of give it a little higher rating than I would otherwise. But you know what? That's my take on it. I'd love to know your take. So please, down in the comment sections below, let me know what you thought of this. If you get to watch it, then, you know, tell me what your impressions of seeing the whole thing was. If you only saw my quick overview, then I'd love to know what your thoughts of it are just from that overview. And as always, guys, please be sure to like and subscribe and all that good stuff. And remember, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May he cause his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up your countenance and give you peace. Amen.